Okay, I have a 2010 5.4 liter Triton engine with it had 49,000 on it when I put this oil pressure gauge in, a mechanical oil pressure gauge, last year. And I went out after reading all the horror stories about the plastic tensioners, the seal failing and causing the startup rattle where the chain whips and destroys the plastic chain guides, which end up in the oil pan, clogging up the sump, lowering the oil pressure. And you know the story if you've been reading about it, or you wouldn't be watching this video because you had the same concern. So what I did, I went out and I bought the cast iron tensioners because I was getting ready to go ahead and rip the front of the motor apart, put them in, and then I thought about it, and I'm like, well, I really don't have the startup rattle when I'm using my truck during the day when it's warm, morning to night. However, I do get a startup rattle occasionally if it's been sitting overnight or for long periods of time, maybe a couple of days or whatever. So what I'm thinking is that the seals in my plastic OEM tensioners are probably okay. If they were bad, I would think that the truck would be giving me a startup rattle most of the time upon startup. When I turn the truck off and I do a job, whatever, and I come back, it should, make a rattle upon startup. That's not happening. It's only once in a while if it's been sitting, like I said, overnight or long periods of time. So what I'm thinking is, depending on which way when the engine was turned off, what way the position of the engine, I'm thinking maybe the valve train is exerting pressure on the cam. Maybe that pressure is also causing the chain to tighten up, and it's probably collapsing the tensioner because there's no ratchet mechanism in there holding it. So even though it's a good tensioner with a good seal, that pressure is eventually, letting the oil bleed out overnight. And now you have a collapsed tensioner. So when you start it up, you're going to get that startup rattle as it pumps back up to where it should be. Unfortunately, the plastic valve chain guides are suffering because they're getting hammered by that chain that's whipping momentarily. So what I've started doing lately in the last year or so is holding my foot on the gas pedal to the floor, and that would disable the ignition or the fuel injectors, and I would start the truck that way. And this way here, the truck would get a long crank, allowing the camshaft to spin, and eventually, the chain would flex and allow the tensioner to relax or tighten back up somewhat. And it seems to be working. I don't get a startup rattle when I attempt this. The unfortunate thing is it does beat on the starter because you're letting it start. I'd say this is a good trick for a collapsed tensioner that has a good seal. But if you have bad tensioners your truck is doing the startup rattle upon every startup, then I wouldn't suggest doing this trick because you're going to totally kill your starter. So with that, I should mention that I never really got the startup rattle all the time when it sat overnight or long periods. It was only once in a while. I mean, it would sit a week before I started applying this technique, and it wouldn't do the startup rattle. It's just a very random once in a while thing. So I think it's a good idea, even after an oil change, maybe to apply this technique. That way there you get some oil starting to flow into the system. It'll never make it up into the heads because there's not enough RPM to really get it up there. I forgot to mention, for the 2009 and 2010 trucks, at least that I know of, by pressing the accelerator all the way down to the floorboards, the PCM will disable the fuel injectors so the truck will not start, as a safety mechanism built in. So if you're like me and you have a concern about these tensioner seals failing, the biggest thing is to monitor the oil pressure. So that's why I ended up installing this mechanical oil pressure gauge into the truck rather than the type that use the electrical sending unit. And not only is the unit rather big, it's almost also impossible for me to get my hands in there because I have the 4x4 axle blocking easy access to that tap location on the oil filter housing. Also, I looked into the oil filter adapter type, and after reading quite a bit of stuff about the oil pressure is not very accurate, it jumps around, people get inconsistent readings. I decided against it, and I really decided I needed a mechanical tap up at the end of the line if I could find it, and that's when I ended up locating the oil galley plug on the passenger side cylinder head, which was actually perfect. The nice part about this oil galley plug is the location. So if you look at the diagram, you can see that the location of this plug is quite a ways away from the original inlet of the oil out of the oil pan, where it enters the oil pump through the filter and pretty much enters the front part of the motor and then the driver's side head. Then it goes into the crank and the connecting rod bearings before it goes to the end of the line where it hits this oil galley plug on the passenger side head. And it only has a little bit more to go after that. It goes up to the front of the passenger side head where the oil pressure is reduced, which is feeding the tensioners, the cam journals, and the lash adjusters. However, the oil is not reduced in pressure. That is from the oil galley plug all the way right up until the VCT solenoids and also the oil that is feeding the cam phasers. So that oil you see on the mechanical gauge is what's actually at the end of the line entering, your cam phasers. So I should note that this plug is very easily accessible by reaching through the passenger side fender well while laying under the truck, so you can pretty much see what you're doing. So basically there's a 1/4-inch Allen wrench that fits into the plug, and once you pop it out, just have a rag handy, a tiny bit of oil will come out. Also, from on the inside firewall area, I drilled a small hole to the right of the AC drain to run the copper tube. Also, plastic tube comes with these gauges, but I did not opt to go with that as the copper is much more durable. And also, I put the copper tube inside of some rubber tubing. This would help prevent chafing on the firewall, and also helps prevent noise coming in from the engine, because you do have a direct connection from your engine going, and it will travel the tube. So if you put some insulation on it like that, it will keep your noise level down. So before you screw those adapters that come with your oil gauge kit into the back of the head, be sure to put Teflon tape on them and secure them, tighten them, don't over tighten them, you don't want to strip them out. And also I should note that tubing is plenty long enough right out of the package, so you can loop it inside under the dash. This way here it will allow you to move the gauge around if you need to service it. And also important is to make a big loop with the tubing outside between the firewall and the oil galley connection on the engine. This will prevent maybe a connector leak, especially if the motor happens to move around on the motor mounts. So once you've tightened all your connections, what I found is duct taping the line where it comes into the firewall in the passenger compartment, duct taping it to the bottom of the heater box. That way there, if anybody gets in and they have big shoes, they won't be scraping the line or bending it. Also, I found keeping the line away from any components under the dash really minimizes the noise, because remember, it's connected right to the cylinder head, and you got cam phase and all kinds of noise from those cam phasers, travel in that head. So the more you can keep the line from touching anything inside your dash area, the less noise you're going to hear. Actually, it's not bad at all the way you have to play with a line. I had to bend some areas away from certain parts of the dash, and it really reduced the noise. Okay, after running engine and tightening everything down and checking for leaks, and it's been sitting a few days now, let's go ahead and fire it up and see how it performs. Okay, truck's been sitting a couple of days. I'm going to hold my foot to the floor to disable the ignition and fuel injectors to give it a nice long crank to hopefully relax that tensioner holding that passenger side timing chain. This way here the long start can hopefully allow the the valve train to remove the pressure off of it, and note how long it takes to for the gauge to react to the oil pressure, because it's tapped into that oil galley plug pretty far from the oil pump. So hopefully we can eliminate that startup rattle that is what's causing a lot of these plastic guides to break and go into the oil pan and plug the oil pump and create all the problems. So here we go, this long crank. And note that needle takes a second to move. Running, not moving yet. There it goes. If you note, there was no startup rattle. It's been sitting a couple of days. Had I not done that, I'd probably get some chain whip in there, and over time that will destroy the plastic guides. Okay, reached our final destination. The temperature gauges would be a little higher if it was 85, 90 degrees out like it's been the last few days. Today it's quite a bit cooler, 72. The oil pressure also reflects that, as it's went from like 60 when we first started it down to like 22 to 22 psi. Usually it drops down to about 19, 20 when it's really hot out with the fans run and AC on. I would suspect that gauge would be reading a little higher pressure if it was tapped at the oil filter, but because we're at the end of the line where you got a little more loss as the oil gets to its final destination back at that oil galley plug. And if I bring the RPM up to like say 2000, you can see it goes up to 40 psi. And right there's 2000 RPM. Then it drops back down to idle. Let's see, we're at idle like around 600 RPM. And we see it's back to about 21, 22 psi. Okay, truck's been sitting a couple of hours. If I had a bad tensioner seal, I should get the startup rattle. And note this gauge, it does take a little, it still lags behind startup, even though it's only been off a couple hours. The oil takes a little time to get there. So I guess in conclusion, we can conclude that my oil pressure is fine. Ford did come out in 2013 and on the record said that 15 psi hot idle is normal for the 5.4. So I know there's high volume oil pumps out there that do a great job at raising the pressure, but I'm pretty comfortable where it is at the moment. The seals seem to be fine. Why these seals are blown, it's anybody's guess. Poor design or anything. Some people, I hear them say, when you get in your truck, drive it like you stole it. That's great, but if the engine's cold and people drive it like that, maybe cold, thick oil being forced into these tensioners, on a freshly started engine when it's cold, say 25 out if you're in the north, may do some damage to these seals. Nobody knows, but we do know they blow. So with this oil pressure gauge, I'm hoping I get some peace of mind there with that. And I will be monitoring the oil pressure gauge for now on. And if I notice that needle fluctuating or the pressure dropping, and maybe the engine phasers start knocking up there from that locking pin, not getting the proper oil pressure, I will tear the front of the motor off and get those cast iron tensioners in there. And I hope somebody gets something out of this video. And thanks for watching.